silence. Hello, welcome. It's Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast. We're back again for episode 5, which has gone very quickly. So I'm your host. I'm Phil Walton. It's good to be here. Good to be back. And of course, the subject of these podcasts is Stu Butler, who again is here tonight. Hi, Stu.
Good evening, Phil. I'm here for the 5th time, it appears.
Fifth time. Although it's kind of 4th, but you know the magic of the internet thing. We'll just ignore that.
We're wearing different outfits today. So.
We are wearing different outfits. I'm still wearing a comedy goatee. So
yeah, there we go.
So keeping well. How's your week been?
Very good. Where are we? We're Thursday, so I'm still running. We're on to day 16 of the month-long 3-mile challenge. Doing well. Work is nice. The sun's been shining, which always makes work a bit easier. And some trials and tribulations with the 5-year-old, but every parent goes through that. But apart from that, everything is well, sir. Still very much sober.
Very sober. Very good. And no demons, no temptations.
No temptations. No, that's very rare, isn't it? But no, like as we said in the last one, all the time the mental health is being managed, there's certainly no inclination that way. And since the Open, when everything obviously was a bit hectic, that's to be expected at such a working long days. But no, back into the 8-hour days, and the mental state is very stable.
Good. So you've mentioned mental health, mental state, and that really is the subject of this episode, which again, because it's such a wide-ranging topic, it might spill into a second episode, but that's just so that we can do it justice. We're not being paid by the episode, so we're not dragging it out. So yeah, this is where we're going to head today, and really it's around kind of you've mentioned on a few occasions that there was a kind of anxiety, depression, and those sorts of things started to get the better of you as you were kind of heading towards the end of your kind of alcoholism, really, your heavy drinking days. So it's a really interesting subject, and of course it's not exclusive to alcoholism, of course not. And I think there are many people that will be listening to this who have had their own experience, me included. So I think from my point of view, if it adds value, then I might contribute some of my experiences, because it's a deep topic.
I think as you mentioned it's a good as you said, towards the end of my alcoholism, my drinking days, I think it's probably a good point to mention that we probably haven't covered in the first 4 episodes. I mean, I am an alcoholic and will consider myself an alcoholic for life. Always. A lot of people who stop drinking may choose not to. I mean, I personally I do see myself as an alcoholic. I know what me drinking again means. It does, I can never go back to 2 cans a night sort of thing. We've discussed that before. But yeah, it's sort of an interesting question, or an interesting word you use, and many addicts approach it differently. But for me, sadly, or not so sadly, I will always label myself an alcoholic from now on. Many people might not,
Yeah. Do I'm kicking myself, and I know it's not an offence and all the rest of it. And this is the clumsiness of not being so engrossed or so deep in that area of kind of addiction that you kind of stumble over words, because as I said it, I was like, it's so not the right word, but a kind of your active drinking period, I guess, is how
it wasn't the wrong thing to say at all, mate. Not at all. It's just as I wrote in a blog once, a very good friend of mine, once I'd sort of told him that I was an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. And we were discussing a up and coming ski trip. And he said, but don't worry, I'm sure you'll be back drinking by then. I was like, I don't think we've quite grasped it. But, that's nobody's fault.
Yes. Okay, now that we've and actually I was going to say something silly then, but actually it's important to set the tone around the context and the language that we need to use to kind of talk about it from an acceptance point of view, and the understanding of this isn't like the cold and you just lay off it for a few weeks and rest up and you'll be back on it. You're an alcoholic for life, but you're not drinking.
Yes, I will. Is paradox the right word? I am an alcoholic, but I will never drink again. I don't know if that's the right word, but
yeah, absolutely.
I have to consider myself allergic. I in my brain, I must understand that drinking means death to me. Not imminent, a pint of lager will not kill me, but it's what that first drink will lead to me being in a coffin. I have to remind myself.
And that's I've not heard that analogy before. I know we are way off topic, but I've not heard that analogy before, to kind of consider it as if it's like a life-threatening allergy. And so make yourself popular the next time you go on a long-haul flight and ask that nobody has a drink around you because you're.
Well, it's while we're off subject, I mean, I remember in the newspapers when with about George Best, and he'd been told that the doctor had told him that one more drink would kill him, and as an uneducated person at the time, I believed that that one drink would kill him. It's now that I understand that. I mean, if this was a gin and tonic, that's not going to kill me, but I would be dead in 6 months' time because I would have consumed 5,000 more of them.
Yeah.
So, as we used to say in the meetings, just, one day at a time, and just if you don't have that first drink, you can't get drunk.
Exactly. Okay, good. That's actually an important sidetrack, but I'm going to force us back on the road.
Yes.
So anxiety.
Yes.
So let's talk about it in the general sense to start with, and then we'll start picking into kind of detailed areas. So anxiety for you, how did that kind of we've talked about it in other episodes about how it manifests, but your version, your flavor of anxiety, what was the most disabling bit about it? How did it kind of capture capture you, really? Was it disabling? Those sorts of things. Talk to me about how your anxiety kind of started and what it did to you.
Oh, well, I think as a younger person, let's sort of look at from when I was, let's say, the age of 18. Probably work anxieties, a young 18-year-old. My first job, I worked in an environment with 30 to 40-year-old men, predominantly, not many of them, 5 or 6, but they weren't shy of telling me what to do. And I wasn't shy of answering them back. But I was very brave, but then I'd go home at the end of the day and almost not want to go back to work because I didn't know how to do. My way of dealing with things was on the front foot, but then it always had a downside to it. I could be big and brave and put on the brave face, but then I'd go home. I didn't realize it, but I was, mentally exhausted from that. And I think over the years, any points of anxiety, if I was in relationships, that had their ups and downs, as everything does. Any ups and downs in life, I would turn to the alcohol, not in such huge quantities as I did later in my life. But obviously now, or I think if I'd have been to see the doctor back then, he'd have said, drink, if you're feeling down, going to the pub and drinking 8 pints of Stella isn't going to make you feel any better. It might make you feel better in the short term, but obviously that next day you're going to have the hangover, the regret, the anxiety is heightened.
And nothing's solved.
And you're 35 quid down as well.
Yeah. Okay, so in the early days it was more work related. And I think I can kind of not work related. It's kind of being in that group environment that was, it sounds a bit like it was, testosterone fueled environment with lots of banter and just kind of getting stuck into people, which I guess if you're not on form can be quite an intimidating place to be.
Well, I mean, and I always used to make sure I was on form. I used to give probably a lot more than, you know, a young lad of 18 to 21 in that first work environment. I gave it as good as I could, but it used to come at a cost that I didn't realise at the time, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of exhausting as well, isn't it? Because actually, some days you might want to have a day where you're just kind of like where you just stew and you just get your head down and earphones in or whatever, and you're just nice and quiet. But if every single day you've got to be putting on your mask, and
yeah, and that wasn't against the guys I were working with. It wasn't, you know, a bullying environment or anything. I just, to be honest, and I've said before, I used to enjoy playing up to that mouthy, gobby, you know, persona who used to give it back, wouldn't stand for any shit. But I used to take it home with me.
Yeah. Okay, and then taking that, when you say take it home, that was just the baggage from the day. There wasn't any came into the home about. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is you've kind of identified that work is a primary driver for anxiety, or it was.
Yeah.
It might still be on some occasions. But did your anxiety seep into other things? You know, people have anxiety about finances, about, you know, how they're going to feed themselves, about their kids, their family, all of that sort of stuff. Did it seep everywhere, or is it just focused in one area?
I was, you know, I've always worried about money. I think everyone does, you know. I've always been quite good at managing money, but I've always worried about it. You know, we used to say that my mum's mum, you know, used to worry about having nothing to worry about, and my mum is very similar. And I think, you know, the more I look into this and the more we chat about this, you know, I'm sort of similar in the sense that if I can find something to worry about or be anxious about, I seem to be able to. And certainly, you know, when I'm on a downer, be it anxiety, or when I was in the stages of drinking heavily, that was just increased exponentially, you know.
Yeah. Okay. And did you recognize then, or do you recognize now? Because I think anxiety, again, like we described with alcoholism, it's not something that just kind of disappears. Is there either triggers or things that happen that you recognize in yourself that kind of go, actually, the anxiety is building here?
Now, I think back then, I wasn't permanently miserable. I was grumpy a lot of the time at work, but again, that was nothing against the place I worked or the people I worked with. And although I wasn't grumpy at home all the time, I was prone to adult tantrums, fits of, you know, almost rage. You know, I wouldn't physically, you know, be violent towards anyone, but in the past, you know, my thing used to be throwing my mobile phone against the wall, you know, and that was, looking back, you know, you can pinpoint the times, you know, when I assume periods of heightened anxiety had just got to that point where something had to give.
So kind of short-temperedness, and then not knowing how to deal with your anger in a certain moment, that flashpoint.
Yeah. And that was sober, you know. That could be alcohol related, but I could fly off the handle, sort of at work, you know, at home, on the phone to someone who it was, I had a good old temper on me, not all the time, and it could come out of nowhere. So yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting. I think for people that haven't had the pleasure of anxiety, it can come out of nowhere as well. So I mean, I've been better at recognizing, and I don't know whether it is a trigger, but not a trigger, but a telltale sign that when my stress is starting to increase, there will be two very certain things that will be happening that I reckon physically that I recognize.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not in a good place. The first is that I do a lot of jaw clenching.
Right.
I will start to recognize that I've got a really achy jaw. The other thing, which is so weird and random, I get earworms.
You
Not
get what?
earworms, not as.
How am I gonna visualize this on the video edit?
Well, exactly. So no, don't do any editing. So earworm being not a physical worm that's in your ear.
Yeah.
You know when you hear a song and you then can't get rid of it.
Right. Okay.
I will get that, but it doesn't have to be a song. It can be a noise. It can be
Yeah.
birds singing. It can be the dog barking. But I will have that earworm for days and days, and it will drive me insane. It will stop me sleeping. But when I recognise that, oh my God, I've got an earworm. Firstly, it worries me because I've got an earworm, and it might just be I've got an earworm, which is just kind of like everyone gets those, or it might be.
I've never had an earworm.
Have you never? Well, you'll start to recognise it once you've got one of that stupid, you'll be listening to 90s hits on the way to work or something, and you'll be singing it all day, and that's an earworm.
Okay. James
yeah.
Blunt comes into my head singing "You're Beautiful."
Yeah, well, that whatever you're listening to in your car, mate, on your cassettes.
I think that was 2004, not the 90s, anyway.
Too much knowledge. Okay, so, but yeah, once that's there, the anxiety, it's right round the corner. That's almost a telltale sign for me that it's coming. I need to brace myself.
Yeah.
But then I recognise some of the other things like being short-tempered and just miserable to be around with no kind of oomph behind me, I guess, as well. Just kind of everything is too much like fucking hard work. Yeah.
The dark, Winston Churchill and his dark dog, or the dark cloud. But it is, and like you've very brilliantly said, if you don't experience it, it's almost impossible to explain to someone how, and I've experienced it not in the last couple of months, but probably 3 months back, how you can be having an absolutely brilliant time. Work can be brilliant, family can be brilliant, sobriety can be brilliant, and then one day you wake up and something is hovering there, and it's not a physical weight, but it feels like something's pushing your shoulders down, and it feels like that mental fog, and you have no idea where it's come from, and you're a big, strong, roughy, tufty 41-year-old man who gets on with things, and you can't.
Yeah. Oh my God, just that period of time in mid-COVID as well. I mean, my work went from being out and about and traveling loads to working at home, and there are benefits to that from my autism point of view. But there were days I was struggling to get myself out of bed, and that's not because I was lazy or tired, but I felt weighed down by just whatever it was that kind of took.
If you knew what it was, you could process it, and you have processes to deal with it, but sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So where was I going to go next? I was going to talk about so did you we'll come back to that actually. So we've talked about sleep. I've just sleep. So and you've mentioned before around not being a great sleeper at all. So typically with anxiety, you tend not to be able to get to sleep very easily, and depression, typically you wake up in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Were you seeing both of those? Did you was it one primarily than the other?
I've always had problems getting to sleep. If I could get to sleep, I'm pretty good. Obviously, now being the age that we are, the midnight wee is a detriment to a full night's sleep. But I will, on good days, I can sometimes not go to sleep because I'm thinking about the next podcast I'm going to do with Phil. I've got a big podcast for the end of season Hwom CC I want to do. and I've got how I want to do it. Where are me and Phil going? Isn't work going great? You know, the wife and the child and everything. So, but on the bad days, or particularly when I was drinking, yeah, that would just be the worry, the daily woes, shall we say, would just keep me up. And if I didn't have something to worry about, my mind would find something to worry about, and it would just go over and over and over. If I was worrying, or whatever I was worrying about, and I could be there for 3 or 4 hours. Go to bed at 10 o'clock, and I'd still be staring the ceiling down at 2 a.m. And that was, that's why in sort of my third year at uni, 2011, I started, when I was writing my dissertation, spending long evenings writing my dissertation, and I started drinking huge amounts of vodka to just get to sleep.
Right. Okay. And that's kind of how you get into that bad habit, because if you're not, not getting to sleep, but you're finding some knocking yourself out, which is not sleeping. But if it means that you've got your eyes closed and you maybe feel a little bit rested than you might have done had you been wide awake all night, then of course you would lean on that as a crutch, really, wouldn't you? So you're a patient insomniac, i.e., you'll lay there in bed and just wait for it to happen rather than get up and move around.
I tend not to get up and go back downstairs, so to speak. I sleep better now. If I'm really struggling, I sort of get out of the marital bed and sort of pop into the spare room and put the iPad on or something nowadays. But back, I spent 18 months sleeping in the other room when I was drinking, just because, I was going to bed later than everyone else, and mentally it was just there was no point me going. I would just get in trouble from going in anyway. We've gone off track with that one, but I do tend to lie there. I will lie there. Back then it was for hours and hours on end.
Okay, so we're just starting to see the entry point to the vicious circle that comes with anxiety, because with the lack of sleep comes the exhaustion.
Yes.
And the lethargy. So, paint a picture for you. You've had, so in the midst of working, so you start your day, you leave the house at 5 o'clock, you've done a full day's work, you come home, you've opened the cider and the vodka, you've got smashed.
Yeah.
It's 11, 12 o'clock, something like that. Laid awake until 3, 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock maybe, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then the alarm goes off and you're up and out for 5 o'clock again.
Yeah. So back then it would have been up. Let's say I'd got 3 hours sleep, a good night. It's up, knackered, but I've got to go to work. You have to go to work because I know even back then I know myself. I try to avoid getting into that vicious circle and not going. Because if I don't go to work on Monday, then that's the week written off. So I get myself up. Probably an anxious puke, one of those horrible anxiety retching. And once that's out of the way, caffeine tablet, Red Bull, into the car and get to work. And hang white knuckle it through the day.
Yeah. White knuckling it is a great phrase, because it does feel like that. Like, if you're not that fond of roller coasters, being in the midst of a period of anxiety, absolutely feels like that moment where your stomach lurches when you're on a roller coaster. And the reason you get off a roller coaster and feel all wobbly-legged is because you've just pumped with adrenaline. But 8 hours of that, 12 hours of that in a work environment, somewhere where you're not comfortable, is just not sustainable. I was going to say unsustainable. I don't know whether that's a word, so we'll say sustainable. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely get that. So your anxiety puke, is that before you leave the house? Is it on your way? Is it when you get there?
No, it got to the point where it was happening every day. So I actually set the alarm 15 minutes. Well, my alarm was set 15 minutes before it was when I started puking, because I soon recognised that I basically needed 15 minutes on my knees. This is, let's give everyone the gory details. At the downstairs bathroom with a towel, because it's stone tiles, or was tiled, towel on the floor, my knees on it, perch, whatever the word is, over the toilet, trying to force a sick up that I was anxiety related, but obviously hangover related as well. And that was daily for over a year. And sometimes it would happen again when I got to work. The anxiety would kick in. We'll discuss that in a bit. I think, I was anxious about going to work, and then I'd get to work and the anxiety would increase as the room filled up with staff members. My anxiety levels would heighten, and at some points I'd go and throw up again, which was, trying to hide that was fun.
Yeah. So while we're there, then let's talk about that. So you get there before everybody else.
Yeah. Let's say I was starting work at 5:30, or let's say we start at 6. So I would try to get to work for 5:15, because Mick, the gardener, my old mate Mick, shout out to Mick, he'd get in very early. He was just one of those guys. And I'd get in to see Mick, actually. I'd worked with Mick 15 years previously at Canterbury Golf Club, a very good friend of mine. And I'd just get in to have a little 20 minutes on my own with Mick. He's a very level-headed individual. He didn't know, he knew I was struggling. He didn't know I was struggling through drink. But I couldn't have entered the room. If I'd have got in at 5 to 6 and the other 13, 14 guys were in the room, I couldn't have got through the door. It sounds mad, because people might say, you can just walk through the door, close your eyes and go. I couldn't have done it. I had to be in that room. And as that room filled up, 1 or 2 people come in, and they were, it's it's 5:30 in the morning. People don't come bouncing through the door. But my anxiety would increase. I don't know if that was a claustrophobic thing. It certainly was. I had I got on with most of the people I worked with, so it wasn't like I disliked them. It's almost like the walls were closing in on me as the numbers increased. It's very strange, very hard to explain.
Yeah. So there's a number of people that I know that won't meet you at the pub, won't meet me at the pub. And like, they don't like the feeling of walking into the pub and looking for somebody. They would rather turn up half an hour early and be sat at the table waiting.
Yeah, it's not something I've experienced in sobriety. I have no problem walking into crowded places now, and it was never anything that I had an issue with prior. People have sort of said to me, well, were you displaying some form of sort of social anxiety at the time? Possibly, but it's not something I struggled with before, and I haven't struggled with since. I don't know if there was a fear. Well, I don't know what there was. It was just, I just couldn't do it.
Okay.
I assumed I thought people would look at me dishevelled and, oh, here comes Stu, he's on the wrong end of one again. I don't know. I'd be guessing.
Okay, so that kind of leads nicely on to where I was thinking of going anyway. But so do you have an idea about what the anxiety at that time, because it started really taking hold while you're in the midst of some of your heaviest drinking?
Yeah.
So was it alcohol related in that you've come to work, are you smelling of alcohol? Is anybody going to ask you any uncomfortable questions? Was it anything like that, or did you feel like it was completely independent of it?
I don't recall being worried if people could smell it. Do you know, I just couldn't face being at work. I don't know, I didn't want to be there. Obviously, I don't remember ever wanting, until right at the end, I never really wanted to drink for, the first thing when I opened my eyes. I didn't want to drink. I didn't need to drink, but I didn't want to be at work. And I don't recall in those sort of that mid to late period even being in a rush to get home to drink, because I knew I was going to go home and drink at some point. So it wasn't like, let's just get 2 hours out of the way and go home and have a drink, because in my head I was still battling it. I don't want to drink today. Please let it be the day that I don't drink. But I just got to the point where I just couldn't or didn't want to be at work anymore, didn't want to be around people, didn't want to have to speak to anybody. Didn't want to have to deal with my own shit, let alone anyone else's.
Yeah. Are you working at the same place still?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So I guess it was, my question was really about, I guess, whether it was the management, the personnel, but if that was contributing to it. But it, and there might still be personalities there, so we don't need to go there necessarily. But one thing you did say that I was going to bring up as well is, and again, I have my experience of this, in that you have your anxiety, your lack of sleep, your exhaustion, and then the one that puts the cherry on the cake that for me fucks me up beyond anything else, because it's the lack of rationalization, is the paranoia.
Yeah.
Something that you had?
Yeah, and I got paranoia. I remember paranoia within the workplace. You sort of mentioned it in the previous bit there, that was I worried about people sort of smelling alcohol on me? No, but I do remember that I used to get it into my head that people were talking about me, which they weren't. But you think that I remember thinking, when I'm not in the room, they must all be talking about Stu, which they've got a lot better things to do. But that's just what my brain was telling me. I've written about paranoia in my alcoholism with regards to, fixating on my wife and my child. Whenever they used to go on car journeys, I used to I don't know if that's the right word, but I used to get it into my head that they were going to have these terrible accidents whenever they were away from me, and I couldn't shake it, And that was at the height of my drinking, active alcoholism, as we said earlier. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question particularly well, but I certainly overthought things to the point where it would just, we go back to that sort of nighttime routine of staring at the ceiling. I'd get something in my head, and it would be there constantly.
Yeah. So if you are having thoughts about people talking about you, did you ever try and address it with anybody? Because there's two occasions where I've tried to express my paranoia in a clumsy, awful way, and it's dented friendships because of it.
Yeah, let's be honest, an all male working environment, which greenkeeping isn't strictly a male working environment, but where I work now it is, and majority of greenkeeping sheds are male dominant. So there is a certain amount of infighting. That's just the way the world is. But I've got a couple of sort of better friends within the team who are still there, and I used to lean on them a lot. What's going on? What's the gossip? Not ask is, because I know, I knew my performance it wasn't unacceptable, but I was becoming sloppy. I was always in on time, but my quality of work was going downhill, and going downhill fast. Yeah. So I'd be leaning on people, trying to find out, if I was the topic of conversation. And it's, they must have got fed up with it. But the way I've never discussed it since, and the people who I work with, they're still there. They've never expressed it to me that I was sort of over the top with it. But I can remember, I've got one guy I've worked with for a lot of years, Dan, and I would have been in his ear a lot, just basically, what's the gossip, what's going on in the tea room.
Yeah, and I guess at that point as well, were you one of the team, or were you part of a leadership team, or you just one of the worker bees?
I was one of two sort of senior greenkeepers at the time. Sort of, we had a head greenkeeper, deputy, and then myself and Dan sat as the senior greenkeepers. But I'd moved to the irrigation side of things, so I was sort of a one-man little irrigation team looking after the system, which meant I'd spend 40 hours a week on my own, which I was very happy with, more than happy. It probably didn't do me any good, and again, that's nobody's fault. That was my own choice. I at any stage I could have approached my boss and said, I need to spend time with other people, but I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. That's the last thing I'd want. And if someone had come and said, how's about you have a week working with Dan, I'd have definitely tried to get out of it.
Yeah. Okay. What kept you going to work?
The fact that I knew, up until I stopped going to work, I knew if I didn't go to work for one day, then I'd struggle to get back. Yeah. Because I, at times in the past, when I look back at sort of working at previous places, maybe I was having periods of anxiety. Maybe I was just being a youngster and partying a bit too hard. But I'd experienced spells in the past where I'd phone in sick on a Monday or Tuesday, and that I wouldn't go back to work for the rest of the week, whether I was sick or not. And so I just knew I obviously knew what I wasn't daft, even though I had that huge mental fog. I knew this had to end at some point, and it was going to end with a fucking great bang. But I also knew, I just had a little bit of a light bulb moment. And I think I also knew that if I could get up and go to work, then I could probably come home and carry on as I was, although I was being a terrible husband, terrible dad to a newborn, terrible friend, terrible son. But going to work gave me a certain amount of leeway. If I'd stopped going to work and blamed the anxiety or blamed the Raynaud's, with my hands or whatever, my wife and my parents would have been knocking on the door, checking on me. And I didn't want that. Yeah. Because I just wanted to do my drinking after I'd been to work for the day.
So I guess it had that dual role really of one, giving you purpose, so a reason to get out of your bed and not fester, but also you knew that from your alcoholism point of view, that taking a significant period of time off work to settle through your mental health will also bring people to the house, which will stop or at least interfere with your drinking.
Yeah, I think I always knew. I've written a couple of blogs about it, that the moment I stopped going to work, or the moment, if I stopped going to work, then it would come to a head and people would get involved, and they wouldn't stop getting involved until it was dealt with. And if eventually that would have, my alcoholism would have come out, so I'd have had to stop drinking. And I didn't want to stop drinking still.
Okay. You've mentioned a few times, and just interested in your opinion on this, really. So you've said a few times back then. We know that there have been great strides made with kind of mental health awareness, suicide awareness, particularly for men as well. People are much more open, and there are initiatives for men with mental health needs. Yeah. Do you think that if you were going through what you went through then, now, from a mental health point of view, do you feel like you might have been more inclined or more open to let people in about what was happening?
What, as in
If it,
2021 as opposed to 2017? Do I think anything's changed?
do you well, it's two questions then. Do you think anything's changed societally?
No.
And no, okay,
No,
and
absolutely. In my small environment, no. Sorry,
okay.
that might upset a few people, but
No,
absolutely no, in fact.
okay. And therefore, then the answer to the second question would be no as well. Then your actions would be no different in 2021 than they were in 17. You wouldn't be more inclined now with the publicity that goes around with mental health awareness to have mentioned to someone like you mentioned this guy Dan that you spoke more often with. You wouldn't have let him into, I'm really struggling with instead of kind of asking about the gossip, like I'm really paranoid, what's going on?
If nothing had changed, if I hadn't done the reading that I've done in the last 4 years, if I hadn't been to the AA meetings that I've been, no, I wouldn't. If I was, a lot of people, and this isn't a big-headed thing at all. I think through my experiences, obviously people who spend a lot of time with me, my family and certain work colleagues, I think we're all a little bit more eyes open to it. And I work, a very good friend of mine at work and went through troubles, not alcohol related, but went through some troubles prior to me at work. And I was one of the guys who didn't understand it at all. So there's been, a couple of examples within my working environment. So I think we as a team where I work are more open, but certainly my industry, greenkeeping, that's fucking absolutely not.
Okay, I find that really interesting. It's a little bit saddening, but not a massive surprise.
No.
That's there's a lot of cheerleading and backslapping around mental health awareness, and like I say, particularly for men. But I guess the instances of people seeking help, particularly perhaps in male-dominated environments, it's a leap of faith around that, to kind of open up and ask for help. And I guess COVID years aren't doing the statistics any favors, I guess, at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's still one of the highest causes of death in men under 50 is suicide. So it's kind of, okay, so more to work on. Shame.
If we, you've read my blogs, probably most of them or some of them, and as much as it's okay to not be okay, and as much as a great statement that is, it's the fucking worst statement in the fucking world, because sadly it's not okay to not be okay, particularly in the male environment, because it's not understood. So stop saying it until something's better's done about it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think as much as there have, I'm a great champion for, and I go to great lengths to be open about my mental health experience, particularly when I'm at work, because I have a leadership role. So I think it's important to talk about it. But I still think that, if you compare attitudes to me needing a month off work because I'm having a period of mental ill health versus a month off work because I've broken my ankle, one sits more easily with people than another.
I had a conversation recently with someone who'd been in a management role, wasn't currently, and he was unaware of my mental health battles, and he was explaining to me how a previous member of staff of his went off with mental illness, returned to work a week later, and he was moaning about how this person would turn to work and the doctor signed him on to 4-hour days for a week. He said, I couldn't even get him back to work for 8 hours a day. And I bit my tongue and smiled and said, we don't always know what's going on. and then we return to swishing the greens.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop us right here. I think there is so much more to discuss around.
I've been ranting.
Well, it's a cliffhanger, I tell you, because I find that area of kind of the societal change and this stigma. We're making progress, but they're baby steps in a massive arena. And there's so much more I want to discuss, because there are things around depression and physical symptoms of anxiety that I don't want us to go into like beyond 45 minutes or that much further. So we'll stop here. And I think when we come back, we should do a little bit of a recap and just reflect on what we've been talking about and just build on it a little bit more, because I think there is more to say.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and then we'll go on with the rest of what we had planned to discuss.
Okay.
Cool. So, listeners out there, you've been listening to Henry Weston's Old Mate. You can get in contact with us on Gmail if you want. It's HWOM thepod@gmail.com or @StewButts on Twitter. Very grateful for you listening. Thank you for the feedback that's been coming through. Send it through to complaints and compliments at Henry Weston's Old Mate.
Yeah, we've had someone who wished to pass on their complaints all the way from the UAE. I think that was more related to a cricket podcast I'd done, but we'll take it. We'll claim it.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. So we will pick up again. So it's Thursday night now. Maybe by the weekend we'll get part 2 of this done and dusted, and get stuck into it. And no, it's flown by. But
it has. Yeah,
I've enjoyed the chat, and it's more to come. But until then, have a good rest of the week, good start of the weekend, and keep sober. And we'll speak soon.
Thanks as always, Phil. Cheers, mate.